Around 80 generators will be installed at various courts across the country as the country battles the daily power cuts. The Justice Department says that this is an attempt to minimize disruptions and ensure that courts continue operating during load shedding. The ministry's spokesperson, Chrispin Phiri, joins us now in studio to outline this a little bit further. Good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. How has the justice system and the flow of work being impacted by the ongoing load shedding?
No, it's certainly been impacted negatively. You can imagine how disruptive load shedding is in our daily lives, and it's also quite disruptive in the court space. Luckily, at least, we have, over the years, at least in the superior courts, in Gauteng in particular, have piloted what we call a court online system. So most litigants are able to still litigate online. But justice service points, for instance, like the Master's Office, which rely on systems that are digital, definitely go offline during load shedding. So that has been that has caused some level of disruption. But also magistrates' court, where people are able to obtain maintenance orders and protection orders, which are now also going online soon. We're finding that load shedding is quite disruptive.
And what's been the thinking around how you're going to roll this out and how you're going to prioritize the various courts? I mean, you've got your provincial courts, you've got your local courts, and which jurisdictions you will be looking at?
Definitely jurisdictions where we have high volumes of litigation. Those would be prioritized. And also justice service points where we know that these are very critical services to South Africans. Those have been prioritized as well. So we're also looking at alternative power systems as well. So in some places we're looking at installing solar systems. In some places we're looking at using universal power systems, UPS. And also in some places we're also looking at using inverters completely to ensure that we're able to at least ensure that when these systems go offline, we're able still to have some of these systems offline. Or rather, when we have load shedding, the systems are still able to go online with these alternative systems being in place, providing some level of energy so that either we're not able to lose the data or at least some minimal efficiency is still applicable.
And you know, when we ever speak of government procurement, of course, questions are being asked, firstly around where are you going to be procuring?
Section 217 of our Constitution requires that we go through a competitive process. So that's not going to change. There would be an open process where people are able to see how the systems are procured, where they are procured from, and that's going to apply standard-wise. So it will not be a case of asking you for a generator or something, and you send a quote. I think there are procurement systems in place in government, and we must ensure that those are complied with. And Parliament as well, with its oversight systems, will be able to ask various questions. So we're quite aware of various procurement processes that apply, but also the oversight system. So the Auditor General will come at some point and say, but this system was procured by tapping someone on the shoulder. Yeah. If that does happen, people will be held accountable without fail. But we don't have any inkling that that's going to happen. These are systems that really do require us to go through the proper procurement processes, and we trust that the system will really come through. It will not be a system it's not been a system that fails. It's normally humans that manipulate the system, but we trust that the system is there and it will be fully complied with.
I wonder whether the Department of Correctional Services, you think about these things as you make these plans, like ahead, right? Because of course, national, you can make the decision. This is what you would want to do, and you'll tell us the figure that you plan to actually spend on this. But it's the people, I suppose, in the various departments, in the various courts, in the various service points that would actually then need to implement this decision that you have taken as a department. And what really then happens there, by and large, most of the time, it's really beyond your control, unless you are deliberate about how you're going to put the controls ahead of time to ensure that we don't then hear after the fact that, no, now we've sent the SIU there to go and investigate what has happened.
Yeah, maybe I should also mention that we are procuring these services with the assistance of our sister department, Public Works, which is responsible for court infrastructure and general government infrastructure in general. So it's not necessarily only a justice project, but we have gotten some level of agreement with Public Works that we're able to do some things on our own. But for major infrastructure systems like this, there is the Department of Public Works. But to your point, how government works is that at the level of the minister's office, it's not the minister who's literally sitting and scouring through quotes. You know? There's an entire system that is in place that ensures that there is a supply chain process that applies. Like any other company, even in the private sector, people do go and procure certain services. And that system must then prevail. But of course, there's always human intervention in anything. There are people who would act according to their own interests to ensure that they benefit. And sometimes also one of the questions that we would always have to ascertain is, are we getting value for money as government from this particular service provider? What is the market going rate? That's why it has to be an open process, so that we're able to see, well, we can all tell that the generator costs X amount. Why are we paying 3 times the amount? Those are questions that you can immediately determine from the types of processes that you would go under. For instance, if you request for an RFQ process, you would then be able to know that this is the market price and this is what we expected to pay. So we don't expect anything different in this regard. But like you do say, sometimes things do go wrong, and then only then we have to react by ensuring that we have the SIU in place, and then they go and analyze forensically what has gone wrong. But we learn from other mistakes, and I think I can put my head on the block in a way and say, in the Justice Department, you don't hear of procurement irregularities of a scale that really worries you. Yes, you will hear from time to time of unauthorized expenditures, but then that is a system that that speaks to how we procure a particular thing, but not necessarily that there is a corrupt practice at play. So
I could be wrong here, but I think one of the reports that I read recently by the Public Service Commission, your department is one of the departments that are paying people late. Am I correct?
That could be for various reasons, contractual obligations or various contractual disputes. That's something completely different. But when it comes to are we getting value for money for the service, and is something that should be procured being procured correctly, I think we have done very well. In fact, our audit results have improved over the years, and we're constantly looking at those type of things improving. So in this financial year, as this financial year has actually ended a couple of days ago. As the auditor comes around, we would really look forward to see how far we've come in improving these type of things. So we're constantly seeing an improvement in those type of things, and we hope that we are almost at the point of obtaining a clean audit. Over the years, we've actually come a long way from having an audit that was very dismal to now we have an unqualified audit with a couple of findings, and we look to improve on that. So we think that the system is there, it's a good system, but ultimately what we want to ensure that this procurement process really addresses the load shedding issues that people are experiencing with our facilities. And the wheels of justice must continue to turn. One of the things that the minister is very clear on, he often says, whatever challenges that we have, we must work around those challenges to ensure that South Africans are able to get the services that they need. So we can no longer say to South Africans, no, sorry, the system is offline because there's load shedding. Because we now know that load shedding might be with us for a while. But even if it's not there for a while, whatever challenge that we have, we must be innovative in how we respond to it, because Batupili requires us to respond to people's problems. You can't say to someone, come back tomorrow, we will not deal with your rape case today. Those type of things.
So, I mean, you've already mentioned, of course, it's a collaborative effort between yourself and Public Works, and you're also already mentioning, of course, we're at the end of the financial year and starting a new one. Is there a budget for this? Have you planned for it, and how much is going to be spent?
I can't say offhand how much is going to be spent, but there's definitely a budget for it, and most importantly, there's collaboration between at least 3 departments. The minister has written also to his counterpart, the Minister for Electricity, the Minister for Public Works, and the Minister for COCTA as well. One of the things that the minister is suggesting is that how do we minimize load shedding at a particular point in time, at least at the courts. So if we know that court hours are from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, maybe can we say let's exempt where the courts are, at least your most voluminous courts, from a load shedding schedule at that particular point in time, then we can load shed them back again at night. So we've asked the Minister for Electricity for advice on that. Is that possible? We've also asked the Minister of Public Enterprises to assist us to explore that possibility with our state-owned enterprise, ESCOM. And
it's a similar challenge with hospitals where they're saying, the Department of Health, that the problem is the inability to isolate particular hospitals that are connected, for example, to residential area, and to say, well, you can exempt this particular facility from load shedding, because that would mean you're literally exempting the whole location. so to speak.
Yes, that is the challenge. But we also know that, for instance, with national key points, it seems as though they would function on a different grid, or there's a certain technicality that applies to that. So those are some of the technical discussions that we are engaged in. But alternatively, we have already started the process of saying, outside of that discussion, how do we ensure that when load shedding does happen, we have the facilities in place to ensure that these courts still function. But one of the things that we have found is, because of the volume of load shedding and the constant volumes of it, we are seeing that some of the equipment that we have is struggling to cope. And that's why we are then asking for this discussion, amongst other things. In other places, we are augmenting the generators that we have with at least more powerful generators, which are able to withstand the level of load shedding that we are subjected to. And also then the UPS systems that we are installing, the solar systems and the inverters, we hope that will really alleviate some of the problems. But we know that this is not going to end. It's not a silver bullet. So we're looking at multiple solutions to ensure that at least when we are faced with the problem of load shedding, there is some level of continuity.
How sustainable will this infrastructure be? I tell you, because one of the other things that we once reported upon, which I found quite disturbing, was a court that couldn't operate because it was just too hot. And they had to actually, I think it was in Mpumalanga somewhere, where because of the load shedding, the air conditioning was not working, and literally had to postpone that particular city.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have agreed with Public Works is, let us have our own maintenance budget. So things like that. I think we don't need to go to Public Works to say, can we fix this aircon? Or even literally, can we fix a light bulb? But currently how the system works in the court space is that everything that is in a particular court space, if we have to fix it, we have to go via Public Works. So that bureaucracy, we find it quite unhelpful. So we have asked Public Works to exempt us, given a certain amount of money, that we are able to deal with maintenance issues ourselves in our courts. I think it's to the tune of R1 million, where we are able to run our own maintenance systems. And that's one of the issues that we are looking at. And it's actually quite prevalent, even in Pretoria and Johannesburg, where litigants complain that, when the system is offline, or in KZN, one of these recent cases, a number of people did raise the issue that aircon was off, and it was very, very difficult to operate in such conditions. And so this new system that we have in place with Public Works, an agreement that we have in place, which will enable us to ensure that we are able to maintain our own facilities to a certain amount, will really go a long way in addressing those type of issues, and also speaks to the sustainability of at least ensuring that this equipment that we have in our courts lasts a lot longer than it currently lasts, because we're able to maintain it more frequently.
It would be amiss, Chrispin, if I have you here and I don't ask this question, so people will slaughter me. Yeah, you would be surprised if I didn't, right? There's talk of a cover-up in the Thabo Bester matter, in one of the facilities. Is the department worried about that? Is there a cover-up that you're investigating?
No, the ministry has been in contact with the National Commissioner quite frequently since this incident has happened. You would have seen the National Commissioner presented to South Africans what they have found at a very high level with their report. And this will also be unveiled before Parliament. As you've seen, there are reports that we are required to appear before Parliament on Tuesday. So that will also happen, where the Minister and the Department of Correctional Services will give a full account of what the investigative report has entailed to date. And we don't think there's been a cover-up. There are a number of difficulties that this investigation has faced. And the Commissioner did outline it in the interviews that he has given, and also in the press briefing that he did. We will be able to explain this fully to South Africans and Parliament properly when we are called to do so.
How are we able to ensure going forward that the monitoring of the internal performances? I mean, I suppose the conversation now is that these privately managed facilities are going to be a thing of the past. But if we do find ourselves in that particular point to say, yes, there's a contract in place between the state and the private player, but how do we ensure that we're able to monitor the internal performance of that private player? Because it seems now what has happened is that, for example, you couldn't just do a walkabout and just show up and say, no, I'm coming to do an inspection here unannounced. You would need to get all sorts of approvals as a department who has contracted that particular facility.
No, it's important to stress that the Correctional Services Act still fully applies, even in a private facility. And I think now we are in a position to to ask and answer questions as to whether the act was fully complied with, who was responsible for certain things, who was responsible for the questions that you are raising now, and that must be answered by the relevant authorities and at the relevant forum as well. I think those are valid questions, but it's not a futuristic question at all. It's not a matter of future. It's a question of now. How do we ensure that? How did we ensure that the conditions that the Correctional Services Act sets out for a proper facility are complied with? And if not, what are the consequences that apply to that?
What are the consequences? I mean, right now they're saying some employees and Labour is saying you are scapegoating their members, those who have been suspended or those who've been terminated. Yet the employer, which is the company G4S, is not going to be held accountable for the what you would call it, incompetence, if you like.
Well, like I said, the Act does provide for what is the set standard. The contract also provides for what is the set standard. So these are legal questions that we would have to ensure that are answered by all of the relevant people who have the responsibility to answer them. And I think it's too early to say that we are scapegoating, because some people, especially I think those who are saying we're scapegoating, don't have the exact facts as yet. So give us the opportunity to table those exact facts, and then from there we can then, if we want to draw conclusions about who is being scapegoated, who is not, we can also then draw conclusions around whether the consequent management processes that have been put in place thus far are going to actually address the issue. The Commissioner has stated that people have been placed on suspension from the correctional services side already. And I think that is a very positive step towards saying that there's some things that we're not going to tolerate as a department. And this is what we're going to do to correct the situation.
You've already mentioned some of the challenges that you had in terms of the investigation. Why it's taken so long? I think one of the headlines that I saw today is saying best are too little, too late. Do you think your processes were too slow to actually get to the bottom and pick this up? Because it does seem that this individual has been out for months, in fact, if not a year.
One of the things that I think the public are not aware of is that by the time a matter comes to the public, we are sitting with an investigation report, at least in draft form. So at least, or not we as in the ministry, but there is an investigative report, at least in draft form. And what you are actually reading is the contents of an investigation coming from Correctional Services itself. But also there are a number of other role players in this space. So for instance, when you are dealing with elements of criminality, Correctional Services doesn't have the mandate to investigate criminality, so we would rely heavily on the South African Police Services. And you would have seen today in the Sunday Times a report around people having a dispute in court. So all of those really do add into the time frame as to how the investigation is going about. But at no point, I think, should we think that we only learned about this at the point at which it gets reported in a particular publication. What you actually do see in a particular publication is the contents of a report that is sitting somewhere in Correctional Services or even at another institution of the state. And that's actually what is in the public domain, which is very disappointing, because then we're not able to provide context, because at some stage you're at a very sensitive point at that investigation. And then it finds itself in the public domain, and you're not able to say, this is the actual context, because there are consequences also to providing that context. And it then may scupper the investigation itself. So as we speak now, we have a full investigation that has been concluded, as the National Commissioner says, so we are able to provide a lot of context as to some of the information that finds itself in the public domain.
Look forward to hearing what the Minister and the Commissioner have to say. On Tuesday, you're saying that they'll be reporting to Parliament. That the spokesperson there for the Ministry of Justice, Chrispin Phiri. Appreciate you coming in and joining us in the studio. All right.